Continuing the traditional life story of the Buddha is disturbed by what he's seen and wants to seek release from this realm of suffering. And yet, he's a married man with a small child. Also, he's used to a palace lifestyle with all of its pleasures and luxuries. But then he takes a bold step. This is called the Great Renunciation. And the stories say that at the age of 29, he abandons his wife and child. That makes it sound like a bad thing, but of course it's not at all viewed as a bad thing. This guy is going to save the world, and he's going to better help his wife and child by doing that. Ashvaghosha tells us how the gods helped the Buddha to leave all of his beautiful concubines. They caused those concubines to be unconscious and all sprawled out in a most unattractive way, all twitching and drooling and in unattractive poses, and it works. He becomes disgusted. Of course, it is true that even the most beautiful people, when viewed from the wrong angle or in the wrong way, if you catch them in the wrong moment, are not so beautiful. So having broken those bonds of pleasure, he sets off searching for enlightenment. So he becomes a renouncer or a renunciate, what early Hinduism, or maybe it's better called Brahmanism, called a shramana. He learns meditation techniques from two sages, and while he makes some progress, he's not satisfied. He then joins a group of 5 ascetics, 5 people who deprive themselves of pleasure, but also of ordinary sleep and rest and food. And while he's with those ascetics, he nearly kills himself by his own extreme austerities. Here's a type of portrayal you often see of the Buddha in this stage, where you can see all of his bones. He looks like a kind of Auschwitz survivor. They say that if you touch his belly button, you can feel his backbone. And supposedly he's eating 6 grains of rice per day. But he finds that this doesn't work. He rejects this course. He rejects this path as too extreme. His path is not going to recommend those kind of extreme measures. After deciding this, he starts to eat normally again and restores his health. And his 5 ascetic friends abandon him and accuse him of just having gone weak, having wimped out, essentially. The Buddha then is ready to strike off on his own. So he sits down under a tree and resolves not to get up until he's found enlightenment. Many Buddhists now believe that this tree, or maybe a descendant of that tree, is still around. This is a site of pilgrimage in Bodh Gaya, which is near the city of Patna in the modern Indian state of Bihar. While sitting under this tree, he's attacked by temptations, by a god or demon named Mara. First thing Mara does is to lie to the Buddha. He tells him that his wife back home has been kidnapped and that his father has been imprisoned, but that doesn't move him. Secondly, he has his 3 goddess daughters do a sensual dance in front of the Buddha to try to tempt him back to sexual pleasure. This, as you might imagine, is a popular subject for art in Asia. Here's a contemporary example here from Malaysia, but that doesn't work either. The Buddha is not to be tempted in that way. Next, Mara conjures up a bunch of demons, a whole army of evil beings who are shooting deadly arrows and throwing objects at him, and he ignores it all. And the tempters all have to flee. In some versions, he touches the ground at this point, and it causes a big thunderous sound that scares them all away. And again, in some versions, there's a final temptation where Mara argues that even if he discovers the key to enlightenment, no one would understand it anyway, so why bother? Sitting under this tree, then, Gautama has a breakthrough. He becomes, they sometimes say, omniscient. He knows all. He gains all wisdom. Sometimes they enumerate other superpowers that he gets as well at that point. He discovers that all things in samsara, all things in this realm of reincarnation, are transient and dependent on each other. And Ashvaghosha says he becomes firmly fixed in the system of non-self. We'll talk about all these teachings in a future lecture. The stories say that at this point the earth swelled, fruit and blossoms fell, and the sky shone bright. After he attains enlightenment, after he has this breakthrough of wisdom, he sits there for some time in further meditation. Some say 1 week, 5 weeks, 7 weeks. And after that, he sets off to convert the world. He has a diagnosis and a cure that he's going to teach to everyone. The Buddha's mission, that is his public ministry, lasts for his final 45 years. The most important thing he does is he founds the Sangha, a community of monks. He first starts with his 5 ascetic friends who realize that they were mistaken to write him off, that he has truly discovered wisdom now. And then his various relatives, his father, stepmother, wife, or rather his former wife, because you can't be married and be a renouncer. At first, the community really is just monks. It's all men. But after some initial hesitation, some say after the intervention of one of his aunts, he founds a parallel order of nuns as well. Of course, monks and nuns, for reasons we'll discuss in a future lecture, are very much kept separate. He also commissions some 60 arhats. These are basically advanced disciples. In some sense, they're enlightened or perfected. They haven't fully gotten the cure, but they're a lot farther along in getting the cure than other followers. He sends out those 60 to go and spread his message. He also, during his ministry, has to survive some opposition, specifically from a guy named Devadatta, who is his cousin and who formerly was his disciple. Devadatta is very much kind of Judas character, to make an analogy with Christianity. He's somebody who's close to the master and yet betrays him. Devadatta thinks he knows better, and so he leaves the Sangha and tries to establish a rival order, that is, his own group. It doesn't last very long, and there are stories of assassination attempts by Devadatta. One is that he bribes an elephant keeper who has a very dangerous elephant to unleash that elephant when the Buddha is coming by. But the Buddha has more powers than Devadatta knows. He thinks peaceful thoughts and supernaturally subdues the elephant. The elephant bows down to him rather than trampling him. Interestingly enough, some later Buddhist writings portray the Islamic prophet Muhammad as a reincarnation of Devadatta. Of course, this is much later stuff because Muhammad doesn't come around until the 600s Common Era. The Buddha dies at the age of 80 after some illness, a short-lived illness. Usually the story is that a poor man who admired him gave him some soup to eat, and he didn't realize it had some poison ingredient in it, and so he dies. He gives various exhortations on his deathbed. He realizes he's dying. He tells his disciples that since he won't be around anymore, they'll have to be led instead by his dharma, by his message. So he was cremated, as was the custom in Greater India, and still is. And there were some quarrels about his relics. Eventually they decide to divide those things up 8 different ways. That, according to the traditional stories, is the life of the Buddha. In the 3rd segment of this lecture, we'll have a quick overview of the spread of Buddhism through the world. How did Buddhism get to be a world religion, having started with one man in northeastern ancient India?